Hey guys, Thomas Joseph here, and today we are talking about pumpkin bread. Now, have you ever had this happen to you where you go through the effort of making a delicious pumpkin bread and it ends up sunken and gummy like this version I have here? You can see that bottom layer of really wet batter that still stays in the final baked good. Well, today I'm gonna share with you some tricks and tips and actually a fantastic recipe for pumpkin bread that I'm sure you will be making this season. We're gonna get started with the main ingredient, and that is pumpkin. Now, here in the test kitchens of Martha Stewart Living, we kind of shy away from a lot of prepared foods or canned foods, but other than beans, pumpkin is one of the great canned food items that's really, really consistent, and that's kind of key whenever you're baking in general, and especially in the fall when pumpkin is so popular in so many baked goods. So this consistent texture and flavor of pumpkin is really key. So I'm using one 15-ounce can of pumpkin puree. This isn't flavored with pumpkin pie spice, you guys, because we're gonna be adding our own spices to this batter. But again, having this consistent pumpkin is really kind of key in making a loaf that will turn out really well and not gummy and sunken. And to this, I'm gonna add sugar. I have a cup of granulated sugar and a cup of dark brown sugar, and this is packed brown sugar. And this is going right into my stand mixer here, and I'm gonna just mix this together until it's nice and evenly combined. Now, the reason we're using two different sugars is one for flavor and also for texture. Now, brown sugar, whether it's light or dark, has a good amount of molasses in it, and that molasses creates a chew or more texture to it than granulated sugar. And that's really great in a pumpkin bread because you want something that has a good amount of structure, sliceability. So I'm gonna mix these up, and while I'm doing this, I'm gonna bring together my dry ingredients. So here I have 3 1/4 cups of all-purpose flour. I'm not using self-rising flour or cake flour, just regular all-purpose. And to this, I'm gonna add 3/4 of a teaspoon of coarse salt, a little bit of spice, because as always with pumpkin breads, you need to kind of amp up the flavor or make it even more autumnal by adding some of the warm spices. And so I have 2 teaspoons of ground cinnamon, a 1/2 teaspoon of freshly grated nutmeg, and nutmeg is kind of one of the spices that I like to have on hand whole, and I like to grate it as needed because I feel like you get really great fresh flavor. So that looks good there. And now a 1/4 teaspoon of ground allspice. Now, if you didn't have allspice or you weren't a fan, you could certainly substitute this for something else. Ground ginger would be fantastic in here as well. Any warm autumnal spice would be fantastic. Now I'm just gonna whisk these spices together. And then the last 2 dry ingredients that I'm gonna add to this mix are the leavening agents. And I'm using 2 different leavening agents today. Baking powder, 3 teaspoons, and baking powder is typically sold as double-acting baking powder, meaning that it reacts at 2 different stages in the process of baking. So the first would be when you introduce a liquid, it reacts and creates bubbles, which creates leavening, and then also with heat. Now I'm also using a baking soda and a 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda here, and the baking soda is actually going to react with the acidic components in the pumpkin bread, and the primary acidic component is going to be added in at the end, and that is buttermilk. So that again is going to create little bubbles, little gases, which will help to leaven the bread. So just mix all of this together, and you want to make sure that you do this with a wire whisk and do it for a few seconds just to evenly incorporate all of the spices and the leavening with the flour. And then I'm just gonna set this off to the side, and I'm gonna add the rest of my wet ingredients to my mixer here. So the eggs to this mix. Now, speaking a little bit more about the gummy factor in a spiced loaf like this, you'd want to make sure that you don't have an excessive amount of moisture. So you're getting a lot of moisture from the eggs, the buttermilk, the butter, and the pumpkin itself. So you have to make sure that the batter is evened out with enough leavening and also enough flour. So this is a really great recipe, guys, and I would encourage you to follow it, but you can certainly play up with those spices and make it your own. So 4 whole eggs, and add these to your mixer 1 at a time. And whenever you guys are baking cakes, cupcakes, muffins, or these quick breads, you wanna make sure that your ingredients are all at room temperature so that you have a batter, ultimately, that is evenly incorporated. You'll get a much better rise out of the batter when it goes in the oven, and ultimately a better texture. So I'm adding the eggs one at a time here. And now I'm going to add the fat, which is 1.5 sticks of unsalted butter that I've melted and cooled. Now, oftentimes you'll see quick bread recipes or spice cakes that are made with oil, and that oil, that fat, gives the cake or the loaf moisture. So it keeps the cake nice and moist, and it will actually last for a few days, which is really great. I'm using melted butter here because I want the flavor of butter. And if everything is at room temperature, again guys, your batter shouldn't be broken at all. And it looks nice and smooth here. You don't see any curdled bits, and that's because everything's at room temperature. So this looks good, and now I'm going to add the dry ingredients. I'm just gonna dump this right in the side here. And I'm also gonna add the buttermilk. And this is a 1/2 cup of buttermilk, so not too much. Again, the more liquid that goes into this batter, the risk of it being gummy in the end. So just mix this now until the batter comes together. You don't want to overmix this because you will toughen your loaf. It will get too chewy. So just until this all comes together. And while this does, preheat your oven, you guys, to 350 degrees. And make sure that you have 2 loaf pans that are prepared. They're about 9 by 5 inch loaf pans that have been buttered, and I've prepared them with some parchment paper that is extended over the sides, and this will help us get the loaves out of the container once they've cooled slightly. Now I'm going to remove this paddle attachment here, give the bowl a little bit of a scrape so that everything is evenly incorporated, and you want to divide this batter up between your loaf pans. You could certainly use a digital scale to weigh out the batter to get 2 nice even loaves. So now these go right into that 350 degree oven for about 40 to 45 minutes. Test with a cake tester or a toothpick in the center of the loaf. With a few crumbs, that's totally fine, but you want it to be mostly clean. Again, 40 to 45 minutes. So our pumpkin loaf has been out of the oven. Now when it comes out of the oven, you want to let it rest in the pan for about 10 minutes, and then you want to invert it onto a wire rack to cool completely. You want to make sure that you get it out of the pan so that it doesn't steam too much. If it steams, it will likely create a gummy layer on the bottom of the bread. Also, the bottom crust here, it won't be crusty, it'll be soft and a little soggy. So I just want to show you guys what this looks like inside. Guys, this is the perfect recipe for pumpkin bread. I encourage you to give it a try at home this fall season. And as always, guys, if you have any kitchen conundrums, baking conundrums, whatever conundrums, use the hashtag Kitchen Conundrums and let us know. We'd love to hear from you, and we'd love to see if you're making some of these recipes, so let us know. Enjoy, guys.